All right. People are coming in now, Teresa, so I figure if
Great.
we give it a minute or so.
Okay, that sounds good.
We have 7 people in here right now,
Okay.
and just for the benefit of everyone, we are recording as
Okay.
of now.
Okay, I'm going to get started. First of all, I want to say good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our second parent partnership series. First, I'd like to introduce ourselves and our learning centers. Sarah, if you would go first, please, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Sora. I'm the director of the Dyslexia Center and Learning Lab at the Campus Laboratory School of Carlow University. And I'm so excited to collaborate and partner with Wheeling Country Day and with all of you, our parents, to be able to bring these incredible presenters and speakers to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm Teresa Kalchek, and I'm the director of the Center for Multisensory Learning at Wheeling Country Day School. So as partners, we want to be a resource for you, for parents, grandparents, caregivers of children with learning and thinking differences. So together, our goal is to be a community group for families that will welcome and connect with professionals in the field of dyslexia. We want to think and communicate with you by learning from educators and authors and other parents that understand and support our kids with learning challenges. And just a little snippet for those of you that may have missed our first session back in February, it's recorded on our websites with professional cartoonist Joe Wose, who shares his own challenges and success as a dyslexic learner. And today is being recorded with Dr. Peg Dawson, and it will be on both Sarah and our websites for you to view and share with others and invite others as we continue to do these monthly. But today, I'm super excited to introduce our guest speaker and author, Dr. Peg Dawson. Peg is a school psychologist by training with an expertise in the assessment of learning and attention disorders. She is the co-author of numerous books on executive skills, including Smart But Scattered and Smart But Scattered for Teens, and we got a guide to success. Have all of her resources. We share them with families all the time. And she also is a past president of the National Association of School Psychologists and a recipient of their Lifetime Achievement Award. So this is your second time returning to us at Wheeling Country Day, Peg, and I'm very thankful for that. She worked with the teachers at Wheeling Country Day back in July so that we could be better to help our kids in the classroom with executive skills. So welcome, Peg. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint. My plan is to talk for 45 minutes and then open it up to questions at the end. And my goal is to introduce you to executive skills, the terminology involved, the definitions involved, and a quick overview of the kinds of strategies we use to help kids with weak or lagging or immature executive skills. So let me share my PowerPoint here. As we go along, if you have questions, if you want to type them in the Q&A box, that would be great. We'll wait till the end though to address the questions. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I hope this works. which it looks like it is. Okay. Just as an introduction, what executive skills are, they are brain-based skills. They are managed out of the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the part of the brain right behind the forehead. They start emerging shortly after birth, but the frontal lobes are the last part of the brain to develop. So these are skills that develop slowly across childhood. And in fact, they take a full 25 years to reach full maturation. And that's in typically developing kids. So if you have a child with a neurodevelopmental learning disorder or an attention disorder, it may take longer than that. There are different terms that we use to describe them. I think the most common term is to call them executive functions. But my colleague and my co-author, a guy named Dr. Guerre, when he and I first got interested in this area, we decided to call them executive skills for a very specific reason. And that was we wanted the emphasis to be on skills. Because a skill implies whatever level you're at, you can get better at it. When we call them executive functions, that doesn't give me the same flavor. I mean, a function sounds like a use, like a refrigerator or a copy machine. Some people call them executive function skills, and I'm fine with that because that keeps skills in there to remind us. Different neuroscientists and researchers and neuropsychologists have different ways of organizing and categorizing executive skills. My colleague and I decided to focus on the skills that we thought were most critical to school success. So that's how we started. We said, of all the skills that people are talking about, which ones are the most critical for school success? And we centered on 11 of them, which I'm going to go through one at a time. But before I go through them, let me share the 11 right here. In recent years, I've been dividing them into two categories, foundational skills and advanced skills. The foundational skills are the ones that emerge first, in many cases during the first year of life. And the order in which I've listed them here is roughly in the order in which we think they emerge developmentally, starting from shortly after birth. The advanced skills are later developing skills, and in many cases, they're built on a foundation of those foundational skills. The order of the advanced skills is a little more arbitrary. In part, except for metacognition. Metacognition, we believe, is the last skill to emerge. And that's of all the terms you see up there, that one may be the most confusing. People have different definitions for metacognition. But let me give you mine, coming at it from a developmental perspective. Metacognition is the awareness that you have thoughts and that you can use those thoughts to solve problems, understand the world, make sense out of things. So with that capacity, once you understand that you can use your thoughts to think things through and to solve problems, then as you can imagine, kids, as they acquire that skill, many of their other executive skills sort of improve after that because they can use their thinking to think about time and organization and planning, et cetera. Now, just a couple other points before I start going through them one by one. And that is when I'm working with parents of elementary age kids, which I think of as roughly preschool through grade 4, grade 5. My advice to parents of kids in that age group is focus on the foundational skills, because those are the earliest skills to develop. And if you put in place strategies to help kids who are weak in any of those skills, you will see progress across elementary school if you keep the interventions in place long enough. When I'm talking with middle school or high school, or when I'm talking with parents of middle school kids, what I say to them is that if you think that by middle school, your kids should be proficient in those advanced skills, you're probably pretty frustrated because these are just emerging skills at that age. I mean, it depends on the child and it depends on the skills. Some kids, they develop earlier than others, but these are just emerging skills for most kids. I'm starting from around 5th grade on. And what we know about emerging skills is they look good one day and not so good the next. So there's an uneven quality to how we acquire skills. Even into high school, some of you may have teenagers, even into high school, especially the first 2 years, those advanced skills are still in many cases emerging. So I'm always preaching patience to parents of kids in that age group. And then the one other point I would make is that if you have a child in that age range from 5th grade on, and they have a significant executive skill challenges, my advice is still to start with the foundational skills. So focus on those. So I will go through them one at a time. I may be able to give you a quick strategy that we focus on. It's obviously just barely scratching the surface of what we know about how to help kids with weak skills, but at least it'll give you some idea. And then I'll talk a little more about general strategies, which are described in much more detail in our books. And Teresa gave you the names of some of our books earlier. So response inhibition is the ability to stop and think before you say or do something. So this is the first skill to emerge. We can see it even in infants as young as 6 months. It looks pretty rudimentary at that point because what a 6-month-old has available to it is respond, don't respond. It's going to look different in a 3-year-old and different in a 13-year-old. And as kids acquire language, they use language to support response inhibition. So if you hear a toddler saying to herself, no, don't do that, because she's heard a parent say that to her, she's using language to inhibit a response. So those of you who have kids, maybe with language delays or language impairments, since language is sort of the infrastructure that supports executive skills, you may see some lags in executive skills as well. The strategy we use to focus on to teach response inhibition, and this is particularly relevant for young children, but I think it bears repeating at any age, is we teach wait and stop. If you can get wait and stop into kids, that's basically response inhibition. And there are very natural ways that parents of young kids do this. Just asking kids to wait a minute before you give them help. That's teaching them how to wait. Or I remember a few years ago, I was in a bookstore and a child was sort of begging his mom to buy him a book, and that wasn't on her agenda that day. But she said, you know what, we'll be back in a week. If you still want that book then we can get it. So what was she doing? Teaching her child to wait. So that's the first one. Oh, the other thing I should say that all of these skills have in common, in addition to being managed out of the frontal lobes of the brain, is that they're all skills required to execute tasks. So that's why we call them executive skills. Or in the words of a 2nd grade teacher who took a class I teach at the University of Southern Maine a couple of years ago, she was trying to figure out how to explain executive skills to 2nd graders. And what she decided was they're the skills you need to get things done. Which I think is a great way of describing these skills. So obviously, response inhibition is one of those skills. Let's go on to the next one, which is working memory. And I like this name because the working piece is really important. You have to work at it. So working memory is the ability to hold in mind all the information you need while you're performing a complex task, or to hold in mind the things you have to remember while you're doing something else. You know, so if you wake up in the morning, open the refrigerator door, see that you don't have milk and you have to stop at the store on your way home from work to pick some up, and you actually remember to stop and do that, your working memory is working pretty good because it sort of kept that get milk on the surface of your brain so that you retrieve it down the road. When I work with teachers or in schools for kids with dyslexia or more complex learning disabilities, what those teachers tell me is that working memory is the weakest skill for those kids. And there are a lot of strategies I could talk about, but the main one I want to sort of pass along is don't rely on verbal instructions for these kids. If you give verbal instructions, they're going to have trouble holding on to it. So whenever possible, pair a verbal with a visual, whether it's a Post-it reminder or whether it's a checklist or whether it's something by the door the kid sees when he leaves in the morning. But whenever possible, support any verbal instructions with a visual reminder. Okay, so emotional control is the next executive skill. This is the ability to manage your emotions. You know, we don't always connect emotions with learning, but it really has a profound impact on learning, both as a positive and as a negative. So if you are flooded with negative emotions, and I think that's one of the effects of the pandemic is we started seeing lots of kids struggling with emotions, in part because everybody was struggling with emotions. That shuts down your ability to focus, your ability to pay attention, to remember, to retain information. And so emotional control can short circuit the learning process pretty quickly. On the other hand, we also know that if you can come up with learning activities that trigger positive emotions, then that makes it easier to learn and easier to retain. So whenever teachers figure out fun activities for teaching a new concept or skill, then it's much more likely that kids will hold on to that information. Kids who really struggle with emotional control, it tends to be a long-term problem that improves slowly over time. The two strategies that I think are particularly effective with kids with significant problems are not necessarily easy or fast strategies, but cognitive behavior therapy is one approach for kids who really struggle with emotions. And that's basically teaching kids to talk to themselves. What could you say to yourself to manage that anger, or that anxiety, or that frustration? So that's one category. And there's a lot of research to show that mindfulness meditation techniques with kids can be a very effective way of helping them learn to control their emotions. There's a great book I recommend for parents called Sitting Still Like a Frog, which gives kids, it's full of guided meditations. It's a great, let's unwind before bed activity. So it's like a 5-minute, and part of it is using metaphor and imagining sitting still like a frog. A frog has to sit still in order to catch its prey. So it just is a really nice way to introduce mindfulness meditation techniques to kids. So flexibility is the next executive skill. Now, I got interested in executive skills primarily through working with kids with attention disorders, because that's the population I work with the most. And kids with ADD or ADHD have all kinds of executive skill challenges. Flexibility is not necessarily a challenge for them. In many cases, it's a strength, because these are go with the flow kinds of kids. These are kids who are always looking for something new and something interesting. But there are kids who struggle with flexibility. I mean, typical people do, but there are kids with learning or emotional disorders who struggle with flexibility. So children on the autism spectrum, for instance, tend to be kind of rigid thinkers, or kids with anxiety. Flexibility is an executive skill that I think sometimes lies beneath the surface. So what we see is the behavior, and we may not realize that it started with inflexibility. So if you have trouble dealing with unexpected changes in plans or new events or obstacles or whatever, what happens when they occur? Your anxiety level rises. So what we see is the anxiety, but it may have started with inflexibility. Now, flexibility can be taught, and there are some nice curricula designed to do that. For parents, there's a great book called Solving Executive Function Challenges, which gives parents lots of scripts. Here's how to talk to your child to help them become more flexible. Here's how to talk to your child to model what it means to be flexible. And the title is one of the strategies. Looks like you're stuck. What can you do to get unstuck? So that's Unstuck and On Target is the people who wrote Solving Executive Function Challenges also created a curriculum called Unstuck and On Target. So sustained attention is the next executive skill. Now, this one obviously is a critical feature for kids with attention problems. There's a key phrase in our definition here. The definition is the capacity to maintain attention to a situation or task. And the key phrase is in spite of distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. And I've appreciated that phrase over the years, because I don't know how many kids I've evaluated. Their parents have been nudged into my office by a pediatrician or by a teacher because someone thinks their kid has attention problems. And they'll say to me, my kid can't have ADD. He can play video games for hours. Well, video games don't involve distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. So what I tell parents is it's not the kids with ADHD can't pay attention, it's they have trouble making themselves pay attention. And that's not going to occur with video games. Where are parents going to see that? 3 places: homework, chores, boring daily routines like teeth brushing or taking showers. That's where you're going to see it. With just a couple of quick tips in terms of sustained attention. First of all, you got to start with where your kid is at. If they have an attention span of 10 minutes and you give them a 30-minute chore to do, it's not going to go well. They're going to work for 10 minutes. They're going to get distracted. You'll corral them back in. So start by breaking those chores up into 10-minute segments with brief breaks in between. And then you can also move to asking a child, how long can you go before you need a break? And just see if you can stretch that out. Use a kitchen timer or a timer on a smartphone or something like that to see if you can gradually stretch out that attention span. Okay, the next executive skill is task initiation. So this is basically the opposite of procrastination. This is the ability to get started promptly on things that need to be done. And I actually think this may be the last and hardest skill to reach full maturation. I mean, I've been describing these skills in the order in which we think they emerge. That says nothing about the full endpoint, the full maturation point. And so task initiation is basically the opposite of procrastination. And if you type procrastination into some kind of academic search engine, you will be hit with over 5,000 citations. I know, because I did it recently just to double check. I haven't read all 5,000 articles, but I read several that really sort of helped shape my thinking about procrastination. One of them was gave a developmental timeline for procrastination, which really fit my own personal and clinical experience with this particular executive skill. Because what it said was, and remember, procrastination is a bad thing. Procrastination increases until the mid to late 20s and decreases gradually after that. So this is a late developing skill. And I've done a lot of thinking about how do you teach task initiation? And I finally came up with a good starting point. It won't solve every problem, but I think it's a good place to start. I think you teach task initiation by asking kids to make a plan with a start time, and then make sure they start the plan at the time they said they were going to start it. So if you say to your child on Saturday morning, so what's your plan for cleaning up your bedroom? And your child says, I'll do it right after lunch. Then your job as a parent is to be there right after lunch and make sure your child starts cleaning his bedroom. And here's why this is important. It has to do with how the brain functions. The brain learns by association. So the more you can pair two things over and over again, they become sort of glued together, so that event A triggers event B. It's a variation on Pavlov's dog. It's probably one of the most famous psychological experiments ever done. Pavlov is a Russian psychologist who, over 100 years ago, rang a bell and presented meat to a dog, and the dog salivated. And after a while, he found all he had to do was ring the bell and the dog salivated, because he anticipated that the meat was coming. So the bell for him signaled the meat. So stated start time, actual start time. If you can link those two together, then that will encourage task initiation. Okay, so those are the first 6 foundational skills. So those of you who have elementary age kids, that's where your focus should be. They're the first skills to develop. That's one reason to start. They're the building blocks for later skills, and that's another reason. But the third reason is they lend themselves to easier interventions. It's a whole lot easier to help a kid make a plan with a start time than it is to help them make a plan. Planning is much more complicated because first of all, you have to figure out what you're planning, and then you have to figure out, so what are the steps to carry out that plan? What's the order in which I do those steps? What materials do I need to accomplish my plan? And then what's important and what's not important, which is the prioritizing part. So when I think about planning in a school context, I always think about long-term projects, because that's sort of where the rubber meets the road with planning. And I decided quite a while back that there's a disconnect or mismatch between when teachers start assigning long-term projects and when we expect kids to plan them on their own. And I think teachers understand that. So they break projects down into subtasks and timelines and interim deadlines, and they check in and they shepherd kids through the projects, at least in the early grades. And I think that's developmentally appropriate. The other aspect to long-term projects, which I think is it can end up being a sore point for parents, is that typically when we assign a long-term project to kids, we expect them to carry them out at home, especially in the last year when kids were at home anyway. And so that puts a burden on parents to supervise those long-term projects. And someone a few years ago found a picture on Facebook that really sort of captures the problem nicely. It's a science project. I don't know how many of you grew up with science fairs. I can remember my first one was in 3rd grade. So, but the topic of this science project is, how much turmoil does the science project cause families? And it's set up the way a science project is. So you have the materials on the left-hand side of this poster board, at least one kid, at least one grudging parent, half-baked ideas of very dubious merit, and procrastination. And then in the middle, you have the results section. You have this really nice graph showing yelling and crying on one axis and time on the other axis. And the closer to the due date, the more yelling and crying is going on. You've got quantitative results. 75% of kids cry, 90% of parents yell, an average of 15 hours of family time is sacrificed. Findings, everyone hates the science fair. When I use this with a live audience, I've had parents burst into applause when they saw this. So obviously it sort of strikes a chord. I think you can help kids learn to plan. Remember, we don't expect young kids to do it on their own, but start by planning something fun, a fun project, or even planning Saturday. Okay, so here's what we have to do on Saturday. Sorry, here's the fun stuff we're going to do on Saturday. Let's make a plan for how the day is going to go so that kids can learn what planning looks like. Okay, on to organization, which is the ability. There's a key word in my definition before I read it. See if you can figure out what it is. The ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information or materials. When I ask a live audience what the key word is, I get a bunch of different answers. Some people say ability. Sometimes people say create. Sometimes they say systems. Well, this is my weakest executive skill. And I assure you that the key word is maintain. I joke that I am great at creating systems of organization. Every 4 weeks, I have to come up with another system for keeping my study clean because the last one didn't work. It's the maintenance part. And if you have ever tried to turn a disorganized kid into an organized kid, this is a long-term labor-intensive process. Because it's not just a question of creating a system and handing it off to the kid and expecting them to run with it. And it's not, everybody's system is somewhat idiosyncratic. So a better way would be to say to your child, you know what, your backpack's a mess. You can't find your homework when you need to hand it in. You can't find it when you need to do it. So let's take your backpack apart, figure out an organizational strategy that will work for you. So you do that, you still can't hand it off to the kid and expect them to run with it. And I finally figured out why that is. And it's because at any single point in time, it is faster not to use an organizational system than to use one. It's faster to stuff that worksheet in wherever than it is to take out your science notebook, open it up, take out your incomplete homework folder, open that up, put it neatly in and put it all neatly back in your backpack. It may take longer in the long run because you can't find it or it's messy, it's so wrinkled you can't use it. But in the moment, it's faster just to stuff it in wherever. The one other thing I would say about organization, because this has struck me over the years of talking about this with a wide variety of audiences, is that parents and kids often have different executive skills profiles. Kids' skills are just developing anyway. But even so, you will see parents and kids with different profiles at times. And one of the biggest ones that keep coming up in my workshops is when I have a highly organized parent with a slob of a kid. Because that's a disparity that really grates on parents. They have such a hard time letting that kid have a messy bedroom, even just closing the door. They have trouble even with that. And when you have that disparity, I think my usual advice is start really small with these kids. Yes, they need to pick up their bedroom. They're probably going to need supervision with that longer than you might think they should. But how about starting with a clean workspace for their homework and just seeing if you can keep that clean on a day in, day out basis. Won't take more than 5 minutes once the desk is clean to maintain that. And so that's the kind of advice we give for that. Time management is the next one. Now, this is where we start seeing the earlier developing executive skills embedded in these later ones. So time management is basically task initiation, sustained attention, and planning, with one additional element that's unique to time management, and that's time estimation, the ability to estimate how long it takes to do something. And in my experience, when people struggle with time management, it's usually the time estimation piece that's not working right. And with kids, what I find is that they routinely underestimate how long an effortful task is going to take, and then they leave it to the last minute and run out of time. I do, though, see a subset of kids with poor time estimation who do the opposite. They overestimate how long a task is going to take, and then they don't want to start it because they think it's going to take forever. I remember a few years ago working with a third grader whose mom told me every night they fought about math homework. Long knockdown, drag out fights about math homework. The kid could do math. That wasn't the issue. He hated to do the homework. And it finally occurred to the mother, they were spending more time fighting about that homework than it would actually take her son to do it. So she said to her son, how long do you think this math worksheet's going to take? And the kid said, oh, it's going to take at least an hour, which is a long time in the life of an 8-year-old. But the mom said, are you sure? Let's see if that's the case. They wrote down the time he started the time he finished, they did the subtraction. It was 10 minutes. The kid was stunned. He had no idea he could get his homework done that quickly. And I think time estimation is a skill that could be taught. So the next night, that mother could have said to her son, remember last night you thought the math was going to take an hour, only took 10 minutes? Look at this math worksheet. Let's take a guess. How long do you think this will take? We'll see if you're right. And so with practice, kids learn to develop a better sense of time. They calibrate better. Okay, just a couple more. Goal-directed persistence is the next one. Now this one is, the way we've written it, this is a very late developing skill. If I were talking about this skill with younger kids, I'd probably just call it persistence. And you can see it in young kids. You know, a 4-year-old who's putting a difficult puzzle together and is bound and determined he's going to finish it before he quits, that would be persistence. But the way we're talking about longer term goals, we're not talking about things you can accomplish by lunchtime. And now we can see where the other executive skills again factor in here, because you can't just set a goal and forget about it. You have to remember it. So there's working memory. You have to have a plan for achieving your goal. So there's planning. You have to start and finish the plan. So there's task initiation and sustained attention. You have to resist the temptation to do all those other fun things you'd rather be doing than working on your goal. So there's response inhibition. If that's irritating or annoying to you, then you also have to manage your emotions. So with that in mind, this is a late developing skill, and it's particularly late in kids with attention disorders. But this is the killer skill for middle school parents, I've discovered, because they expect kids to have this skill by middle school. And in my experience, most don't. So those are the parents who come into my office and they'll say to me, doesn't my kid realize that how he's doing in 8th grade is going to affect what college he gets into in 4 years? And of course, the short answer to that is no, because they don't have that kind of time horizon. They haven't lived long enough to be able to picture 4 years out. And they don't know what college is, so they can't picture that either. So I'm always preaching patience to parents of kids in that age group. I think you can encourage goal-directed persistence with kids, but the typical mistake that parents make, and I made it when I have 2 sons that are now obviously well into adulthood, but that was the mistake I made when they were in middle school. I was looking at goal-directed persistence through this lens of academic performance. So I was pushing them to make the honor roll or to bring their grades up. They weren't there yet. So you start with a goal the kid wants. Or if the kid doesn't have a goal, a nice place to start is by having them save up money for something that's a little expensive, because that builds goal-directed persistence. First of all, they have to figure out, how am I going to earn the money? How am I going to save the money? How am I going to resist the temptation to spend smaller amounts of money on something less expensive before I've saved up for the big thing I'm trying to save up money for? So that's a natural way to help younger kids develop goal-directed persistence. And then finally, metacognition. So I gave you one definition before, but it's the ability to see the big picture, to step back and monitor how you're doing as you're doing something. So it involves self-monitoring, self-evaluation. So I think it was a little voice in your head that's sort of tracking how things are going. Okay, have I given myself enough time to finish this test by the time it's up? How's this project going? Have I checked the rubric to see if I've got everything I'm supposed to put in this project? When all of that is metacognition. Metacognition is also involved in abstract thinking. It's the ability to read between the lines or to do inferential reasoning, those kinds of things. I would say with most kids, it begins to emerge around age 11, but it's a very slow developing skill. And it tends to come a little faster for girls than for boys, as is true with many of these executive skills. Okay, so I want to quickly just give you some more information. Those are the 11 skills. And for the longest time, I was saying, yeah, these are the skills you need to be successful in school. And then it finally occurred to me, no, these are the skills you need to be successful in life. And that's illustrated by this next cartoon I want to share with you. The title of the cartoon is Dale's 4th grade education pays off. And the prospective employer is saying to Dale, the job you're applying for will require you to know long division, state capitals, and cursive writing, which pretty much captures my 4th grade curriculum. But here's why I like this cartoon, because for it to be realistic, what would that employer be saying? He'd be saying the job you're applying for will require, planning, time management, organization, goal-directed persistence, all executive skills. So this is the cartoon I use with high school algebra teachers who say, wait, you want me to teach executive skills and algebra? And so I say, yeah, the job you're applying for will not just require you to know quadratic equations, and that may be questionable, but it will certainly require executive skills. So with the philosophy of a picture being worth 1,000 words, I want to show you a series of MRI scans that show how the brain changes and how late executive skills develop. So this is what an MRI looks like when you take a picture of a brain. And a guy named Paul Thompson, neuroscientist at UCLA, brought the same kids in year after year from ages 4 to age 21. He didn't go to age 25, unfortunately. And he just took the snapshot of their brain and then created a composite. So I'm going to take you pretty quickly to age 21, and I want you to see how late in the process the frontal lobes mature. So if you can see my cursor here on the right-hand diagram, at the top of that image, those are the frontal lobes. And the key to understanding this is the color. So an immature brain is red and orange. A mature brain is blue and purple. So you can see at age 4, there's nothing that's purple. The blue is mostly associated with sensory processing, like vision and touch. Those are the first brain systems to really come online. So in the frontal lobe, you see a tiny bit of blue and you see a lot of red and orange. So I'm going to take you quickly to age 21, and I want you to see how late in the process this part of the brain turns blue. It does not turn purple because we still have several years to go. The other fun fact about brain development is the brain matures from back to front. So you will see that. You will see the blue start at the bottom of this image and travel up. Okay, so watch. Okay, so there we are at age 21, and you can see not a whole lot of purple here and still a fair amount of green. In fact, this says the 21-year-old brain is mostly mature, but the areas of green show that even at the threshold of legal adulthood, there is still room for increases in emotional maturity and decision-making skills, which will come in the next few years. So we have a long ways to go. Okay, I want to move on. I do want to move on to, whoops, sorry, I have to go through this again, apparently. Before I talk about strategies, I just want to quickly make one other point, and that is I want to get people thinking about the language we use or have used in the past to describe these kids. This was a kid I saw twice. He was 7 the first time I saw him. He was one of the most hyperactive, impulsive kids I'd seen at that point. He also had Tourette's syndrome. He couldn't take stimulant medications because they exacerbated his tics. But he managed to get through elementary and middle school successfully. I mean, he had a couple of things going for him. First of all, he was smart. He did not have a learning disability other than his significant attention problems. He also had a mom who stayed on top of things, a mom who made sure he did his homework, a mom who made sure he put it in his backpack, a mom who kept in close contact with his teachers to make sure he wasn't missing anything and was staying on top of everything. And then he hit high school, and basically his freshman year, he crashed and burned. And so his mom called me. He had failed 2 classes. He was in summer school making those up. He had D's in 2 other classes. His mom called me at the end of his freshman year and said, I can't do it by myself anymore. I'm going to need help from the school. And so she asked me to do an evaluation in order to get some additional support for him, which I was able to do. And as part of my evaluation, I asked the mom to find one teacher who knew the child well to fill out a rating scale on him. And so this is what she wrote. What concerns you most about this pupil? He's lazy and not working to his potential. Please describe the best things about this pupil. He's sweet and has a good sense of humor. Which describes just about every kid that I have ever worked with ADD. But what I want to call your attention to is the answer to that first question. Look at the terms, the words we're using to describe this kid: lazy and not working to his potential. Those sound like character flaws to me. Those sound like things that nobody has any control over. And then what's the intervention for lazy? I mean, we have interventions for task initiation, sustained attention, et cetera. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, whoops, I don't know why I'm there again, other than the next slide, here's my plea. Instead of calling students this lazy, unmotivated, not working to potential, disruptive, oppositional, messy, tardy, forgetful, absent-minded, or lacking a work ethic, how about we describe them as having challenges in task initiation, sustained attention, response inhibition, et cetera. All those negative terms on the left-hand side have a corresponding executive skill label on the right-hand side. The left-hand side terms leave me discouraged. The ones on the right lead me to problem solving. And, you know, I'm sure with the staff at Wheeling Country Day and the staff of the schools that where your kids go, that may not be an issue. And you don't have to even worry about how your kids' teachers are describing these kids. But my guess is some of you have relatives who might use some of those terms to describe your child. And if that happens, what I suggest is say to them, you know, if they call your child lazy, say, you know, we prefer to think of it as problems with task initiation and sustained attention. And that's what we're trying to work on here. Because lazy gets stuck in a kid's head and then they start thinking of themselves as lazy, and then it becomes a convenient excuse for continuing to not do the things they need to do. Okay, so quickly, 3 primary ways parents and teachers can help kids with weak executive skills. And these are described in much more detail, particularly in Smart but Scattered, which is the book geared toward kids from 4 to 14. And I'll give you examples of each of these. Change the environment to reduce the impact of weak executive skills. So we're basically trying to modify the environment to make it more supportive or less punishing. Teach the child the skill that they're missing or that's weak. And then finally, use incentives to entice kids to practice. In the early stages of any habit formation, and executive skills are habits, it's hard. It's not easy. So if we can put an incentive on top of that, then that may make it a little easier, a little more rewarding for kids to think about practicing those hard skills. So environmental modifications can include changing the physical or social environment, modifying the tasks we expect kids to perform, or changing the way adults interact with kids. So examples of environmental modifications: manage distractions so that they have a quiet workspace to work in. It doesn't mean that because a lot of parents will say to me, will you please tell my kid to stop listening to music while he's doing his homework? And I'm not saying that, because there's some evidence to show that music as background noise can actually be effective in terms of helping kids focus. Instrumental music is better than music with lyrics because other kids will start paying attention to the words, but instrumental music can be helpful. Modify tasks, shortening them, building in breaks, creating a schedule, building in choice. Now you got 3 things you have to do for homework. What do you want to do first? Just that choice. It energizes a kid it gives them a little more control over their lives. And that's what these kids are looking for. Giving advance warning when something changes, which is particularly important for kids with problems with emotional control or flexibility, because when they're hit with something they weren't expecting, they often struggle with that. And then use visual cues rather than verbal nags. I talked about that before. So those are some environmental modifications. How we talk to kids is another kind of environmental modification. The use of praise can be very effective, but it depends on the kind of praise. And in fact, just as a general principle, the research shows that if you can achieve a ratio of 3 positives for every piece of corrective feedback you give a child, you know, that alone can change behavior. It gets tricky. First of all, it's hard to remember to do that. But second of all, there's effective praise and there's ineffective praise. And it takes a little more work to figure out effective praise because it means being really specific in terms of what you're praising. So for instance, saying to a child, I appreciate you loading the dishwasher without my having to bug you about it. You're praising 2 things there. You're praising the child for loading the dishwasher and praising them for doing it without having to be bugged about it. So it's that kind of thing that can really make a difference in terms of how you deliver praise to kids. Okay, I'm aware that we're running out of time here, and I just want to make sure I get through these others. Teaching the deficient skills. So I have a formula for that, and our books are full of examples of this. Whenever possible, embed the skill you want the child to learn in a daily routine. List the steps in that routine. Walk the child through those steps repeatedly. Create a visual that outlines the routine, and then fade the prompts by having the child use the visual to follow the routine. Just 2 quick examples. This is a room cleaning checklist. It was created by an occupational therapist that I worked with a few years ago. She at the time was working at a residential school for kids with dyslexia. So this was actually, they were using this in the dormitory, but it would work at home as well. Their decision was, as kids moved into back to school after the summer, they would have all the kids put their stuff away so their rooms look good. They took a picture of them, or took pictures, as you can see here, and then turned it into a checklist. So there are 4 components to this room. I mean, there are 10 things on this list, which for someone who's organizationally challenged like me, that's a little daunting. But they've broken it down into 4 pieces: my clean desk, my clean shelves, my clean bed, my clean floor. And so as the child cleaned their bedroom, and if a parent were using this, parent could say, does your desk look like that picture? How is it different? What else do you need to do? So that's one example. Another one, teaching kids to make study plans. And this, I like this one because it gets at multiple different executive skills. Okay, this is not where you actually write down the specific homework assignments, but this is like an expanded to-do list where you write down the tasks you have to do: spelling, math, reading. And with each one, you ask the child to answer the question, how long will it take? So what are we working on there? That's time estimation, time management. The next we ask, when are you going to start? So there's task initiation. That's the plan with the start time. Where will you work? Now we're asking kids to identify where exactly they're going to work so they can visually place themselves in a setting, so that we're solidifying that image. And then if we have them write the actual start and stop times down, that's a check on a couple of things. Did they start when they said they were going to start? And were they right in terms of their estimate? I remember when I talked to the faculty at Wheeling Country Day last summer, one of the teachers, who was the remedial reading teacher, I think, said that she had been using this with the kids that were in her summer school class. This was, they filled out this plan before they went home at the end of the day to make plans for doing their homework. And she spoke very highly of it. She felt it was successful, that kids enjoyed actually following through and seeing, and it gave them a concrete way to sort of plan their time. Okay. And then finally, using incentives. This is one where I'd be happy to answer questions about it. I run into people's values about this. And I hear a lot of parents who say, why should I pay my child to do something they should be doing anyway? So that's, I'm always a little hesitant about this, but here are the benefits of incentives. It just makes the effort of learning a new skill and the effort of practicing and performing a task a little less aversive. It gives the kids something to look forward to. And additionally, putting an incentive after a task teaches delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is another way of talking about response inhibition, right? If you have to wait for something, then you're learning to wait. And I've created very elaborate incentive systems for parents that I've worked with and for my own kids when they were at that age. But whenever possible, I rely on simple incentives. My favorite one is just having the child identify something fun they want to do that they can do as soon as they finish whatever the effortful task is. First homework, then video games. And in fact, that fits with the next one: first work, then play, using specific praise, etc. Okay. So that's that's my speed charge through executive skills. And now I'd be happy to answer any questions people have. And as I look at, I'm not sure anybody's put any questions in the Q&A. So you can certainly type something in now if you have some questions.
Peg, if I can just say, would you suggest for a lot of people that have not been introduced to this book, when they get this, to start out with one thing I love to do, it's what I recommend to parents, to start out with the questionnaires, just so that they can have the discussion with their child about their challenges.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when parents who've read that book talk to me about the book, what they tell me their favorite chapter is the one where they get to assess their own executive skills, strengths, and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So, and that can be an interesting conversation right there, depending on the age of the child, is that, in fact, I'm doing a series of workshops now at a high school here in New Hampshire, where parents and kids are coming together, and we've had them each fill out the executive skills questionnaire, and we've given them sort of a script for talking to each other about what they're good at and what they struggle with. So when parents are willing and able to share, organization has always been a problem for me, and here's how it annoys me. Here's how I've tried to deal with it. That gives kids permission to say, yeah, I'm not so good at task initiation. I can see that now. So yeah, so exactly. Fill out the one for yourself, and then fill out the one that's appropriate for the age of the child that you're working with.
Because
Yeah.
that starts that dialogue between the parent and the child, because I'm thinking of what you said earlier when you said about the parent that's highly organized and the child that's not. So it's like, okay, mom, you're too much and I'm too little. So where do we meet in the middle? So maybe that's what's needed. So that starts that dialogue.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any questions in the chat box? I haven't. Okay.
Oh, that's right. I didn't check the chat box.
Okay.
No, I see people are, oh, thank you for putting those.
Yes. Thanks, Sarah, for posting that.
Yeah, and you know what, I'm going to stop sharing now because.
Yeah.
that
If there aren't any questions yet, would you like to talk about, because I would like our guests to know that we'll be getting together again for the second part of Peg's talk on executive skills on April 22nd at the same time, at this lunchtime. And so she's going to continue to work with us. But Peg, you made a suggestion to prepare us for that. Would you like to share?
Yeah, sure. So we've created a bunch of different surveys, and this is one that's not in the Smart but Scattered book, but we found it really helpful. We call it an executive skills problem checklist, and it lists about 60 different behaviors associated with executive skills, different executive skills. And we just ask parents to identify 3 to 5 that they think their child struggles with, or that they're the most interested in getting. And this is probably a better way to say it. Which ones of these are things where you would like strategies for? So we're going to send that out. It's a Google form. So all you have to do is check off, 3 to 5 descriptors, and it will tabulate those. And so I will be looking at what are the biggest vote getters for next time. So it's totally confidential. There's no names attached to it, but it's just going to give me that information so that I can look at what the biggest concerns are. I think there's a space, there'll be a space for other at the bottom where you can write in something if you want to, because I may not have hit all of them. But I think it will just help me organize the presentation for next time to make it the most useful for the most number of participants. And Teresa, my understanding is when people, will you be sending this out to everybody who's on today's call?
Yes, those that are registered today, I will just forward to them, right. And they can, like I say, invite your friends, invite other family members. Anyone can fill that out, and then we'll make sure we get that to you.
Yep.
Well, it'll go directly to you. Once I share it with them, it'll go directly to you. Is that how that'll work? Or
it'll be a link. So
okay.
You'll be sending them a link. All they have to do is click on the link. It'll bring them right to the survey with instructions for how to fill it out.
Okay.
And then at the end of the survey, I think they hit send or submit. I forget what it says, but I think it's pretty intuitive.
Yeah, because we want to hear what are they looking for? I mean, love how you went through the executive skills and just gave us a quick overview of what they were, because when we say executive skills, sometimes you don't think that working memory is an executive skill, like you said, and it is. Yeah. And that's a big problem with our kids that are struggling learners.
Yeah, I think another point to make about the distinction between executive skills and how smart a kid is, because those are two different sets of skills. So, and there are many kids who, they have just absorb information and absorb knowledge. So you'd think they would just breeze through school without any trouble. But if they have some executive skill challenges, if they have trouble getting started on tasks, if they have trouble organizing their work, if they have trouble planning their work, it doesn't matter how much they've learned in terms of knowledge. If they can't produce it, then they're going to struggle. And so, that's why we called our book Smart But Scattered, because those are two different sets of skills. And many very bright kids really struggle because and in part struggle, we giving them a lot of positive feedback about how smart they are, and then we're on their case because they're not producing, and so they're getting that mixed message. And in fact, what I find is many of those kids start not thinking of themselves as smart after a while because they've just been getting too many negative messages about how they're late, they've forgotten something, they failed to pass something in. Yeah, so. Okay.
Good point. Very good point. Are there any questions from anyone or comments? Okay. Well, if there are any questions, you can certainly send to Sarah or myself, and we can forward those to you, Peg.
Yeah, sure.
But I really appreciate your time and your sharing with us. We love having you.
No, this was fun. This was
Yeah,
fun.
definitely.
And I was just wondering if we do post it, when we do post this recording on the website, I'm wondering if we could attach that Google Doc so that people that weren't able to make it today could fill that in also, if that's a possibility.
Yeah, sure. I'll get the Google Doc out this afternoon. And the other thing is I will also send you a copy of this PowerPoint, because some people may not want to actually watch the video. They just want to download the PowerPoint. So I'll make that available too.
That's great. That's one thing, Peg, you always share your resources, and you're always like, yep, you can have this posted. So that's great. That's really great.
The charts that you showed were just so important, and I'd love for our teachers all to have look at them as well.
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Peg, have a great day. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you on April 22nd, 12 o'clock.
Okay. Very good.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.